Today we're going to talk about a hidden feature of your brain, something you might not even know exists. It's basically a delete button for your mind that you use every single night whether you realize it or not.
You know that feeling, right? Maybe it's after your first week at a new job, or you're trying to learn a new language, and your brain just feels completely full, like you literally can't cram one more piece of information in there. Well, what if that feeling is actually your brain telling you it's time to run a cleanup process? Because it really does have a built-in function to clear out all that clutter. It's basically a delete button for your mind.
Now, of course, there's a scientific name for this incredible process. It's called synaptic pruning. This is how our brain gets rid of old, unused connections between neurons. And why does it do that? To literally make space for new, stronger, and way more efficient connections. It's a huge and often totally overlooked part of how we learn.
So let's take a closer look at this delete button. Let's really get into what some call the other half of learning. Because it turns out, our ability to unlearn or clear things out is just as important as our ability to practice and learn new things. I'm sure most of us have heard this classic neuroscience saying, right? Neurons that fire together wire together. And that's really the heart of practice makes perfect. When you practice an instrument or juggle or try to speak a new language, you're literally strengthening the physical circuits for that skill inside your brain. But that's only half the story. While practice is busy strengthening the connections you use, synaptic pruning is making space for all that new growth by clearing out the old connections you don't use anymore. You absolutely need both to learn effectively.
Okay, to make this a little clearer, let's use a really helpful analogy. Just think of your brain as a secret garden.
So in this garden, your synaptic connections, those are all the flowers and the weeds. Then you have your glial cells. They're the gardeners, kind of tending to the whole operation. And the real stars of our show today, the microglial cells, they're the expert pruning crew, and their job is to go in and pull the weeds. So this leads us to the biggest question of all, right? In this huge, complex garden of your mind, how in the world do these tiny gardeners know which connections to prune and which ones to leave alone? How can they tell a beautiful flower from a pesky weed?
And the answer is it's absolutely fascinating. Researchers have found that the synaptic connections you use less often actually get tagged by a special protein called C1q. It basically acts like a tiny little flag, marking that specific pathway for removal.
Okay, so we know what happens and how things get marked. But when does all this incredibly important gardening actually take place? Well, the answer brings us to the nightly cleanup crew, and it's the whole reason why sleep is so critical for a clear mind.
Remember that feeling of your brain being totally full? Well, this is literally why. When you're learning something new, your brain builds a ton of new connections. But here's the thing. They're messy, they're temporary, and they're really inefficient at first. They're kind of like rough sketches that need to be cleaned up and refined. And all of this refinement happens while you sleep. So first, your brain cells actually shrink. This creates the physical space for those glial gardeners to move around. They come in and clear away all the waste, and then the microglial pruning crew gets to work, removing all the synapses that were marked for deletion. And just think about that for a second. 60%. Your brain cells can shrink by up to 60% just to make room for this nightly cleaning. It's a huge physical change, which just goes to show how essential this maintenance really is. This really paints a perfect picture of the difference. Trying to think with a sleep-deprived brain is like trying to hack your way through a dense jungle. It's overgrown, it's slow, and it's exhausting. But a well-rested, well-pruned brain? That's like a walk in the park. The paths are clear, and thinking just feels effortless.
So the bottom line is this. Letting this process work means you can think more clearly and quickly. It's basically the biological version of defragging your computer's hard drive. And the really good news is, even a quick 10 or 20-minute nap can give your microglial gardeners a chance to pop in and do a little bit of tidying up.
Okay, now we get to what is, honestly, the most empowering part of this whole thing. You aren't just a passive observer in this garden, you are the head gardener. You actually have a direct say in what gets pruned and what gets watered. The guiding principle here is really simple, but it is incredibly powerful. What you focus on prevails. Your attention is the sunlight and the water that decides which plants in your garden are going to grow strong. It's a really straightforward use it or lose it system. The neural connections you use over and over are the ones that get strengthened, and the ones you neglect, those are the ones that get tagged with that little protein flag, marking them for recycling. It's honestly that direct. So just think about where you put your mental energy every day. If you spend it focusing on your work, learning a new skill, or practicing meditation, you're watering those connections. But if you spend that same energy dwelling on a grudge or worrying about things you can't control or obsessing over some TV show theory, well, you're strengthening those circuits instead.
Look, you can't always control what happens to you during the day, but you can almost always control what you pay attention to. And by making that choice, you are literally, physically crafting the very structure of your own mind.
So let's bring all this together. Now that you know that you are the gardener of your own mind, the only real question left is, what are you going to grow?
So what's the strategy here? It's really about being mindful of your thoughts. If you want to weaken a connection, say a recurring worry, the key is to just stop visiting that mental path. When the thought pops up, you acknowledge it, and then you consciously, actively change your focus to something that's more beneficial.
So the big takeaway is this: you are the gardener of your mind. You have the power to decide which connections wither and which ones flourish. You can literally prune your mind using the power of your attention. And so the only question is, what will you choose to grow?